True Crime Conversations acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast was recorded on. It's Mother's Day, May 13, 1984. Two boys are out playing in Tampa, Florida, when they come across the body of Nguyen Long, known to her friends as Lana. Her hands were tied behind her back and, shockingly, her naked body has been left with her legs spread open. Her death would be the start of an investigation that would see police discover a new victim almost every 2 weeks. Michelle Sims, Elizabeth Loudenbeck, Chanel Williams, Karen Dissenfriend, Kimberly Hops, Virginia Johnson, Kim Swan, Vicky Elliott and Anne, known as Artis Wick. Investigators couldn't quite see all the links between the victims. I mean, some were sex workers, but not all of them. They were different ethnicities, ranged in age from 18 to 28. They all had ligature marks where they'd been tied up and all had been raped. But while several had been strangled, one had been shot and another had had her throat cut. So not even the same method of killing in all of them. But just one piece of evidence would tie them all together: red carpet fibres. With the rate of killings escalating and no suspect in sight, police were desperately searching for the one thing that would finally break this case open. And then, on November 3rd, 1984, a 17-year-old girl who'd just finished her night shift at a local Tampa Krispy Kreme was heading home when she was plucked from the back of her bicycle by a stranger. The next 26 hours would see her in a fight for her life against a man who tied her up, raped her repeatedly, and held a gun to her head. What the killer didn't know was that his victim, Lisa McVey, was sadly uniquely experienced with violent and abusive men. And while she did look to him to be yet another vulnerable victim, her presence of mind to plant evidence at the crime scene and incredible ability to recall detail under pressure, despite being blindfolded for almost the entire ordeal, would later shock even hardened, long-time detectives. But in the aftermath of her ordeal, not realising that she had actually just survived a serial killer, Lisa knew she could potentially lead police to the door of a rapist, if only she could get someone to believe her. I'm Claire Murphy, and this is True Crime Conversations, a podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. The detective who worked the case involving Lisa McVey still refers to her as the true hero of his career. What she managed to do, no member of the Tampa police were able to, linking a serial killer to his victims. But as we often see in cases where women and girls come forward with stories of sexual assault, finding someone to first believe her story and then actually take action is incredibly difficult. And sometimes these women are completely overlooked, especially if the victim doesn't fit the typical mould. And Lisa McVey certainly did not fit. Now, next week, we are going to be speaking to Lisa McVey herself, who now goes by the name Lisa May. But today, we're speaking to the director and producer of the movie Believe Me, Jim Donovan and Jeff Vanderwal, the dramatic retelling of Lisa's story. They worked personally with Lisa, who even makes an appearance at the end of the film, to explain how this courageous and brilliant young woman brought down a serial killer. Now, you might have caught this movie on Netflix when it was released back in 2021 and felt the impact when you saw that real Lisa featured in a world where young women are abducted and often killed. This film showed Lisa's strength in being able to understand her captor and escape. So what is it like to recreate a person's worst experience for the small screen? And how do you help actors bring to life someone's real-life nightmare? First of all, I wanted to find out from the both of you what initially got you interested in Lisa's story. How did you find out about it, and what was it that drew you in to feel like you needed to tell that story?
I was producing a documentary series called Surviving Evil back in 2013, and we were looking at really compelling and really surprising stories of survival across the board. And we came across Lisa's story for that series and ended up meeting her and connecting with her and talking to her. And the way the series unfolded is that the person who survives essentially tells their story almost direct to camera. And because she was one of our very first episodes that we did for that series, I had the good fortune to go down and spend some time with her in Florida And with the director of the show, I was there for the interview, and she also, still lives and works in the neighborhood where she was abducted. Still lives, in basically the same part of Tampa. So she's able to take us around and show us where she was taken, where she was released, show us the streets. And it was such a powerful and really emotional experience that I never forgot. I never forgot Lisa. I never forgot any of it. And it was incredibly moving. And I think partly because her story is so inspiring, and partly because she's just such an incredible survivor, and the things that she went through are so surprising and shocking. And she's come through as just such a great and surprising person. And when we started developing movies and started developing scripted stories based on true stories, Lisa's was, within the first 2 or 3 that we talked about, so we have to do Lisa's story. And I called her and asked her, and she was completely on board for it. And then she was able to do the same thing with the writer, Christina Welsh, who wrote the movie, went down and had the same experience. She went down to Tampa. She spent days with Lisa. She drove around. She really got to know her and know exactly what was happening and what it was like for Lisa when she was taken. And then Christina went away and wrote an incredible movie. And then in the course of setting it up, I talked to Jim and had been a big fan of his work and thought that he would be able to sort of help bring it to life and do justice. We knew we needed a very special and talented filmmaker. And so we reached out to Jim, and then he came on board. And then from then on, we were really just a team. And we all worked really hard. I mean, Lisa was involved as a consultant, Christina, who did an amazing job writing it, Jim, who did a phenomenal job directing it. We all just worked together to try and do her story justice.
Well, Jim, I wanted to ask you what it was like to have the victim of the crime consult with you as you're telling that story, because some of the themes in this movie are really difficult to tell sensitively, because it does involve sexual assault, it involves, child sexual exploitation, it involves abduction, and a serial killer. Like, that is sensitive topics, and you've got that victim of that crime with you trying to help guide you through that process. What was that like for you?
All around, this whole project was intimidating in so many different ways, because for me, it was my first true crime film. I had up until then done purely fictional series or movies like this. So the mindset is very different. Suddenly, when Jeff approached me with the project and said, this is for real. So you're going to read something that's more or less accurate. And like you said, you're reading through and you're seeing things that somehow you're used to seeing, except that the difference is these things really happened. These crimes were committed. This person pulled through. And so to have Lisa suddenly at our fingertips, to sort of just kind of dial a number, call, speak, but more importantly, when she showed up, I mean, that was incredibly intimidating, because you're trying to do justice to the story. You're trying to, it's all fictionalized, and I'm a veteran of bringing stories to life that way. But now suddenly I have the real person who came to set, and all the actors and all the crew are aware that this has happened, and there she is. So in many ways, there was that feeling of motivation to get it right, but also a kind of I'd say a validation, because she was very supportive. She was very supportive. She was there to try and encourage us, I think. She's saying, "Oh my gosh, it feels like," and I don't know whether she, was completely telling the truth or just trying to help us get through telling her story, but she certainly motivated the entire crew. And at some points, she got emotional, and that touched us a lot. And for me, I had never really worked on a fiction film where I was standing next to the person to whom this actually happened. So an incredibly special experience for us all. And of course, we managed to go down to Tampa and put her in the movie at the very end. You'll see her. And that was lovely,
I've watched this movie twice and I cried both times she comes on the screen.
She's just a badass cop.
Yeah.
And you just see her there after seeing this vulnerable yet powerfully determined young woman, make it out of there. I mean, it's a film that has many parts. It's almost like 2 or 3 films at once, because, you see this vulnerable person get abducted, abused, all this violence takes place, and then you see her start to figure her way out, and you see her work with law enforcement. And now at the very end of the movie, you see this police officer with her charger and her gun and look at you. And it's just like, wow, I was really happy that she was on board and that we got to meet her and that she's actually in the film.
What was that experience like for the actors on set, though? I mean, for the actress who plays Lisa, I imagine that would have been an incredible experience to be able to have her alongside her and guide her through that. But I often think about the actor who played serial killer.
Bobby Joe Long, yeah.
Like for him, that would have been incredibly difficult to be the perpetrator and have the actual victim see his performance. Like that must have been an incredibly difficult situation.
My sense is that we created this bubble with myself, Jeff, and the actors, those two especially, Rossif Sutherland and Katie, where we had mechanisms in place, safe words, rehearsals. We talked a lot. There was a lot of research. We had this bubble. And my one of my first jobs as a director is to make sure that bubble stays intact so that, hey, we're stressed for time or whatever happens, I'm there to sort of keep the bubble around us and make sure we're making something where we're trying to stay focused. And so when Lisa came in, I can't speak to how they felt, but I know Jeff and I talked a lot about. I was worried about the bubble. Like I think I asked Jeff, can you make sure you got her so that I don't have to deal with Lisa. I deal with the actors because I know we're on a schedule. We're trying to make a movie, and I don't want to intimidate them because we got to tell this story. So Jeff had a big part to play in that because he was really taking care of Lisa, and so I was opening the door, and we would work or talk or exchange. But then I would close the door and make sure that we're still doing our thing because that's my job, right? How do you see it, Jeff? Is that how? Do I remember it correctly?
Yeah, no, I think you really do. I mean, it's also worth pointing out Lisa, who was a tremendous asset during the entire, like the writing, the production, all of it. When she came and visited set, she didn't stay for all of it. I think she knew. I mean, partly she's a busy person. She's got a job. I think she also knew that as much as she wanted to come and visit set, she didn't want to see all of it. And there were definitely times where she was on set and we talked, she always knew what we were filming. She none of it was ever a surprise. But there were things that were still difficult for her to watch. And so it wasn't as though she was there for every moment, but she was there definitely to see certain things and to give advice. And the one thing that, we talked about before, and I think it was actually really empowering, was she actually taught the police officers when Bobby Joe Long is arrested, who come in and arrest him and snap the handcuffs on him. Lisa showed those actors how to do that. Like as a police officer, like, oh, this is how you do it. So she got to help the actors who were going to arrest the guy, like the layers of performance meeting reality, meeting what happened, sort of fold back on themselves with it. But I think that was really enjoyable and profound for her to see that. In some ways, like she's witnessing that arrest again. And then in terms of the bubble, I mean, I would say with both Katie Douglas and Rossif, everyone really understood and wanted to be careful with the story. And they were all filmmakers. Like, I mean, the memory that I have from Rossif on it is that Rossif was often sitting at the monitor even when he wasn't in the scenes because he wanted to watch and be a part of it. Like, it's one of the few films where there were many of us at the monitors, not because we were crowded around, just because we all knew it was this special thing that we were making. And so even if you maybe weren't in the scene, you might want to watch it or be there for the other actors or just be present. And so I think, to Jim's point, it really was a bubble, but it also felt like we all had the same mission, which is sort of do right by Lisa and do the whole story justice. I mean, there's also, there were many victims of Bobby Joe Long that did not survive. And we were aware of that too, that across the board, we're trying to be as respectful with this entire story as we can. And everyone really took that on. Everybody from the cast, the entire production team, the other producers, everyone was really on board with that.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Claire Murphy. I'm speaking with the director and producer of the movie, Believe Me, The Abduction of Lisa McVey. Up next, I ask about the actor who had to play serial killer Bobby Joe Long on screen and how he navigated portraying a real-life person who was at his core so very evil. The actor who played Bobby Joe Long, how much evidence do you give him from real life to create that serial killer persona on screen?
He was quite impressive. We met, well in advance of shooting, obviously, because we worked on rehearsals and whatnot. But the first time we met, it felt like he had a whole suitcase of research that he had done. Like he was asking questions, and I was a little bit taken aback because I think he found things that I didn't know about, and that probably Jeff didn't know about, because he had just dug into this guy. And I have to say, for me, to do justice to make a film like this interesting, you have to have that level of curiosity and dedication to the character. Even though he is a serial killer, even though he is a deranged individual, he did all these bad things. Unless you have a compelling Bobby Joe Long, you don't have a compelling movie.
Mm-hmm.
And Rossif came to it, and I was truly impressed. I mean, I had to suddenly switch gears and try to get up there and work, because you have to understand, or at least have some kind of an understanding, some kind of a way in to this character, because otherwise he's just a paper thin monster, and a lot of value in the film is left on the table if you don't take the time to try and see, okay, what's wrong with this guy? I mean, I read up on things that aren't quite in the film, like that he hit his head many times and had possibly some mental issues that way, that he had a condition where he had too much estrogen producing glands or whatever, and had developed these physical attributes that caused him to be bullied, and so on. So, like it's not that we're trying to forgive what he did, but we're trying to create a sense that he's not just a caricature. He's a character, and that raises the stakes for Lisa's story, how she overcame all this, how she got into his head. She managed to get herself released, in addition to all the other layers of what she had to overcome, because there's quite a few more. But yeah, Rossif really pushed me, and I think pushed us all, to really, really work hard on creating a character that people are going to be compelled to watch, as hard as that is.
Was Bobby Joe Long still on death row when you were making this film? Was he aware of what you were doing?
I asked myself that question a lot, because I as I said, I had never done a true crime story, and I was aware he was on death row. And in some strange way, I felt some kind of responsibility. I can't quite put my finger on why I felt this way, but I had this weird sense that, like I'm somehow some kind of a judge in this guy's trial. He was put to death. What is it, 2019, Jeff? I think I looked this up.
Just after the movie came out. In fact, he was executed. Yeah,
and so yeah, when we were making it, he was still there. We didn't consult with this guy. I have no knowledge of that. If any journalists might have talked to him, so that's what we read. I'm just looking at public sources of info about him.
Talking about the movie itself and the crime as it played out, how accurate is it to real life, and where do you have to step in and fictionalize some of that story? And why do you make those decisions in that process? Jeff is more aware, I think, of the background of some of the secondary characters and how some of these things, some of these characters were combined. We have 90 minutes to tell this story. And there's an act structure. Some things are done for efficiency and done for structure. And I'd say a lot of that happened in the script writing phase. I don't know, Jeff, do you have any thoughts on that one? How far are we from the real story?
This is very close, extremely close to the real story. There is very few liberties taken. It's very, very close to exactly what happened. As Jim said, yeah, there are composite characters. There are things that are truncated for time. I think, the difference between having both produced the doc and the scripted film about it, it's the scripted film allows you access to a certain emotional expression and emotional understanding from the characters, from all of the characters, not just Lisa, but everyone, that you don't get from the documentary. And I think in that, because it's only 90 minutes, you can illuminate and kind of shine that light and give the bigger sense of the person as a whole. And that's through everything. I mean, that's casting, that's the writing, that's all of it to really suggest what the characters are like. But it is very, very close to exactly what happened. I mean, I think we're trying to unpack and explain an awful lot of Lisa's life, and Lisa should speak for her own life and her own experience, but just to give insight into both what her home life was and also how the abuse she had suffered and the trauma she had suffered before Bobby Joe Long kidnapped her gave her some insights or some tools in terms of that were then going to help her with her survival. And certainly we couldn't unpack the entire story of what had happened to her in the lead up. But I think the movie gives you glimpses at that to give you a sort of bigger understanding. And certainly in terms of what happened with her and Bobby Joe Long, it's, pretty much by the numbers of what they actually went through.
There's a lot of things that we can't show. I mean, there's a lot of things that we push the envelope on. Some of the rape scenes are none of it is graphic. You're not seeing any, genitals. You're not seeing nudity. But you're feeling it. Mm. And I think we had to really push hard on giving you the sense of the trauma that she suffered. But then on the other hand, you have to think about the audience. How much do they want to see? Like, I have an aversion to blood. I don't want to see blood. I don't like seeing people getting cut up and, you know what I mean? So I have to think about the audience. Maybe somebody doesn't want to see the rape. And I'm pretty sure, the network doesn't. So there's that. I mean, I think we have to think of the audience as we're making this. There are bits in the story I find that are really left that we had to condense into bits and pieces. And I'd say her story of abuse with her family. I mean, those things are all hinted at very quickly so we can focus more on her and what she went through. But like Jeff said, there's a whole history of things that she there's a lot of stuff that we're not treating so much in the movie. We're sort of saying, yeah, these things happened, but we don't exactly spend much time there. We're spending a lot of time with the abduction and her getting out of it and helping solve the murder case. So we have to sacrifice those things.
Next, I ask about Lisa's family and how the movie was received by them. Stay with us. We did mention that Lisa's story is in 3 parts, essentially, and a big part of that is the trauma of the abuse that she experienced at the hands of her family. But I'm interested to know how Lisa's family handled you turning their story as well into a movie, because it's not just a story about Lisa. There are other family members, people who've been arrested and sent to jail, and, there's her mother and her grandmother who are also involved in this story. Like, how was that received with her family?
Certainly her sister was aware of all of it. I mean, she was, estranged from certain members of her family. Her grandmother had passed, I believe, by the time we were making the film. And so it was something that she was aware of. And I know that, she obviously spoke to her family. She had a screening of the movie as it was coming out and invited a lot of her family members to it. I mean, speaking of sort of crying when the film was over, I know that one of the times I cried while making this movie was the day after it aired, and she'd had essentially her own friends and family screening in Tampa. And she phoned me the next morning and she told me that she liked it. She was happy. She was happy with the movie. And it was such an emotional release for me to know that she was happy and her family was happy that I teared up just knowing that for her, being able to show it to her community and say, this was my experience, and also, be proud of it and proud of the way the film turned out meant a lot to me, still means a lot to me. So her family certainly knew. I think, she's come to a place now where, and again, you should speak to Lisa. I don't want to speak for her, but I think she's come to a place now where she's really owns her story. She has gained the agency that you see her fighting to gain as a young person and has it. And I think that's now, how she lives. So the folks that she was close to certainly knew. And I think some other people had passed away and it was less of an issue for her.
I guess the second act then is the abduction, but the third act is her interaction with police and then the subsequent investigation. How important was it, and I mean the title of the film suggests that it was quite important, in the aftermath of what happened to Lisa, she found it very difficult to get people to believe what had happened to her, even though the evidence looked pretty clear that something terrible had happened. She had to fight because she didn't look like the kind of victim that I guess we would expect a young woman who'd been through what she had been through should look like. How important was it to tell that part of the story, and what was that like to try and guide the people on the film to react in the way a police officer might have in that moment? Because police are doing the best that they can with the resources that they have, but also they have been trained to react in certain ways also. Like how is it to try and create that scenario with all those moving pieces? Because police aren't always the enemy, but they're not always the hero either in this situation.
This was very structured in the scripts, and it was very clear that we were respecting what actually happened in 1984. As I saw it when I've just recently rewatched the film, it was one of the parts of the film where I was most uncomfortable, because I was realizing that, it's hard to believe that this is the way things were in the 80s. But that's what this speaks to for me. Like, it kind of feels like everything has changed. It kind of feels like, at least in the world we know, that people are more sensitive to victims speaking out. People are more open to listening and believing when someone has the courage to say, hey, I've been a victim of a crime here, rape, all these things. I think in the 80s, it kind of felt like, the complete opposite. Blame the victim. Like there's some really unnerving scenes, which I mean, as I watch them, my skin crawls, like when she's talking to the female detectives and they're completely convinced that she's in a fantasy that, hey, you watch a lot of cop shows, don't you? And, you're watching this thing, you're going, how could they possibly be saying these things? And yet this is based on truth.
When she does sit down with female detectives, you kind of think, oh, finally,
yeah,
they, of all the people in this scenario, are going to be the ones who believe her. And then you're so disappointed when they don't.
I mean, one of the things that is fun about this for me as an experience is there were a lot of people posting videos on TikTok about their reaction to the film. And most of the ones I saw were people just crying, young ladies, especially young women, crying in tears. Why didn't they believe her? That was the thing that they seemed to be all latching onto, is that no one would believe her. As weird as that is as strange as that is to our ears today, because it's hard to believe, but it's there. It happens.
When you were making the part of the movie where we look into the investigation that followed when they are starting to believe Lisa, and she does have some advocates in the police force who do finally understand what it is she's been through, and then they do finally link her abduction to the serial killer, it almost feels too hard to believe that Lisa managed to do what she did while she was being held hostage. Like, I mean, Jeff, you've told this story twice now. Like, can you believe that Lisa, in the situation that she is in, which she was sadly uniquely qualified to deal with, but can you believe that someone would have that presence of mind whilst abducted, tied up, blindfolded, sexually abused, to do the things that she did to survive? Like, it feels so unbelievable that someone can be that strong of mind in that moment.
Yeah, I think I think a large part of why the story is as powerful as it is, it's why Lisa's so impressive. In speaking with her, there's also a moment, I think her detective work, I think her active survival skills also go through an arc. I think, at the beginning, she's trying to gather information and she's just trying to learn anything she can that's going to help her survive. And then I think there's also a point, and in speaking with her and having talked to her about it and gone through her interviews and things from the documentary, there's also a point where I think she becomes determined that she doesn't want what's happening to her to ever happen to anyone else. And so part of the leaving the blood in the car, part of the fingerprints, part of that is like, if I don't make it out of this, I want them to know that I was here and I want him to be caught. And the heroism of that and the presence of mind of that is so impressive too. And then you go to the third layer of it, which is when she is freed and she is able to escape and she meets Barry Pinkerton, who believes her. She has the strength to go back with them and do all of the stuff, that she has the strength to help them really crack the case. It's incredible. It really is incredible. And it's a testament to Lisa. And then it's also, as the end of the movie suggests, worth remembering too, that she then dedicates her life to helping other kids. Like she has spent her career now as a police officer working to protect other children. And it's amazing. I mean, she's a real hero and a very special person. And that's, a large part of why the movie was made. That story is so incredible and hopefully inspiring for other people.
Have you been tempted to revisit this story again? Because there is so much more to it. And as you've already said, you had to leave out certain parts of the narrative because you do have only a 90-minute window to tell this story in. But, Long was eventually it was uncovered that he was connected to, 10 homicides and various other rapes, and that it was escalating very quickly over an 8-month period up until when he was arrested, and then, led to his execution, which Lisa attended and, defiantly stood and waited for him to make eye contact with her, which he sadly never did for her story. But have you been tempted to revisit this? Because there is just so much more to this woman and her story and everything around it.
Short answer, no. It's like I have a thing for the fascination that we have for these stories, where I have difficulty retelling the same story unless there's a reason to, and I have a difficulty saying yes to. I find that there's too many of these films that repeat the same thing over and over again. And to me, we told this story in a good way, and it's a positive film. It's not just exploitative. It's a story of resilience. It's a story of victory for her. So I wouldn't tell this part of the story. I don't know if there's a part of it that would be intriguing or worth telling, but there's got to be a reason we tell these stories. As I say, I have a certain aversion to just exploitatively going back to this darkness. So believe me, is it's a dark story, but it's actually it's a story of victory, of good over evil. So I'm happy I made it.
I guess that's something we don't see very often in the true crime space, is the real positivity that comes from telling this story, because they often are, as you said, really dark, and they don't really leave the darkness that often.
Yeah, I think in these days, especially in these times, we need positive stories. So I guess I would have to see if Jeff can find another angle to it, or maybe comes up with another script. And if he asks, I might be tempted to do it.
What do you think, Jeff? Would you revisit?
It's a really loaded question in a lot of ways. And I think part of it is having told it once as a documentary, or helped tell it once as a documentary, and helped tell it once as a scripted film. I'm endlessly inspired by Lisa, and I have so much respect for her and just like her as a person. In the run up to doing this, I was emailing with her, and I'm looking forward to talking to her on the phone in a couple of days, and she's great, and she's really, really inspiring. And so that part I really like. But there is also, as Jim sort of alluded to, there's such darkness to this story, even though there's the inspiration. There's probably a limit to the number of times I want to film some of those scenes. And, I've had the good fortune to produce a few other movies based on true stories and true crime projects. And when we do them, we're always looking for the stories where ultimately they are inspiring. I think just both for myself and for the people who work on it, and also for the viewers, quite frankly, for the audience members, it's you can go through the darkness if you're able to give somebody some light at the end. And I think that's partly why Lisa's story resonates, is that she comes out into the light and we all get to see that at the end. But the older I get and the more of them I do, I think the more cautious I am about spending a lot of my waking hours in the darkness. And having spent 10 years making documentaries, and I've done that a fair bit. And it does eventually begin taking a toll on you to just spend a lot of time thinking about that. I mean, speaking about Rossif, it took a toll on Rossif. Rossif is a really sweet, sensitive, smart, father who, in order to play Bobby Joe Long, had to go to a very dark place. And you see that even just in the relatively short term of our production. And so it's a bit of a loaded question, one I'm probably not answering well, but I think that's it. It's you have to think long and hard about whether or not you're going to go back and spend more time in that place.
I'll take a swipe at a coda here, and it would take great courage. But the other film to make, if there is one, would be about Bobby Joe Long. What compels a guy to do what he did? I mean, if we really want to talk about it, there was a film made about Hitler called Downfall, and it was quite controversial. People were accusing the filmmakers of humanizing Hitler, but it was a very courageous film. And I think as a society, if we can't understand what compels people to do the ugly things that they do, then we're copping out. There's always a dark side. Okay, again, researching this character, what pushed him? How do you get there? I mean, these are questions that we had to ask ourselves and Rossif in our story. But that is not a film that's easy to make or easy to watch, And again, maybe that's the question mark. Is there more to learn from the villains in these stories? Why did you do this? Or can it be understood? Can it be helped? Is there any point to it? I mean, these are all big questions, but maybe that's a part 2 to my answer.
I think you've probably hit on something there, because it's pretty well known that women are rather large consumers of true crime content. And I think a lot of that is trying to learn and understand the motivations of men in particular when they are the perpetrator. And that is something I think we don't get from the film, maybe a little bit more from the documentary, but we don't understand his motives. We don't understand why he did what he did or where he came from. And I think that's probably the one thing that true crime does for women in particular, is we get an understanding, and maybe we can then identify it in people around us and maybe better protect ourselves from someone like Bobby Joe Long. I think that might be why we get so much out of true crime. So maybe it is an understanding of his motivations in his past.
Well, there's a film that, it's a stretch, but this film or this 4-part miniseries called Adolescence, I think, on Netflix. That would be, I guess, what I'm alluding to is to, you're left with these really conflicting feelings about what happened, what you just saw, but you're asking yourself the questions, and so that's, in these films of, there is maybe that part of the story that is still, we don't understand. No, I don't think none of us really understood, or there's some of it in the script when she gets into Bobby Joe Long's head and she starts to find that crack that'll get her free. But otherwise, almost nothing. It's just kind of, as much as we tried to make him a compelling character for the purposes of telling her heroic journey, we still don't understand this guy. And maybe we don't want to, maybe we don't need to, certainly not for this film. But that's, of course, yeah. Is there a story that would help us help them? I don't know. Something like that.
After I wrapped up this conversation with Jim and Jeff, they realised they hadn't mentioned the detective who helped Lisa discover who her rapist and who their serial killer really was, and they call him the second hero of this story. Sergeant Larry Pinkerton assigned himself to Lisa's case when others had dismissed her claims, many saying they couldn't believe that someone who had so much intimate detail of the crimes against her could be possibly telling the truth. Jim and Jeff knew that Pinkerton had to be played by someone who was known in Hollywood as a trustworthy man, a man who could embody the essence of the one person who trusted Lisa, who listened to her, and in partnership with her helped catch a killer. And that's why they chose JAG star David James Elliott. Thank you to Jim and Jeff for helping us tell this story. True Crime Conversations is a podcast hosted by me, Claire Murphy, and produced by Tali Blackman, with audio design by Jacob Round. Thank you so much for listening. Next week, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be speaking with Lisa herself. We'll hear about her lived experience of surviving a serial killer. What she did that day and the weeks after is absolutely incredible, and we are very thankful with Lisa for being so open with us in her first ever podcast interview. We'll see you next week.